السيد الرئيس تأتي
President, our request to hold this urgent debate is to be taken in the context of violent attacks by Iran, which mean we can no longer stay silent. The region is a disaster now as international human rights rules are violated. We are seeing all efforts which have been initiated by the state of Kuwait and other states of the region for many years being completely undermined. These efforts were aimed at ensuring good neighborliness and trust. We are seeing an existential threat to international and regional peace and security. This aggressive approach is undermining international law and sovereignty. We are seeing the cowardly targeting of the ministerial meeting that took place last Wednesday in Riyadh, for example. This was an aggression that does not undermine the prestige of states, but also poses a gross violation of diplomatic rules and principles upon which the UN's work is based. This attack, which was simultaneous with the shelling of oil and gas facilities and civilian infrastructure, including this morning at dawn when the international airport of Kuwait was targeted, all of this amounts to a form of terror waged against civilians. And it is in violation of Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 6 of the International Covenant. These articles guarantee the right to life, the right to individual safety. In addition to the material damage, repeated strikes against economic objects and international maritime waterways pose a systemic threat, the underpinning approach of which is to undermine development and trade and to compromise development, as was recognized by the UN General Assembly, and to force states to use their sovereign resources for defense instead of using them for healthcare and education. This is an indirect form of aggression against the rights of future generations, and it undermines their right to live in a stable and prosperous environment. To threaten navigation in the Strait of Hormuz is a gross violation of the International UN Convention on the Laws of the Sea, and we are also seeing how the right to food is being threatened in contravention of Article 11 of the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. The state of Kuwait, as well as states in the region, on the basis of their historical traditions and on the basis of the UN Charter, are a stronghold of democracy, and we would like to express our most noble commitment to Articles 2 and 4 of the Covenant as we seek to settle all disputes peacefully. However, this measured discipline has been confronted with aggression, ballistic missiles, and drones in violation of the 1817 resolution and Article 52 of the Additional Protocol to the Geneva Conventions. We therefore believe in the crucial role of this international organization, and we iterate my country and neighboring countries' rights to defend themselves and to defend their citizens in keeping with Article 51 of the UN Charter. We call on the international community to take a firm stance so as to put an end to this aggression, which does not respect any rights, and in order to safeguard regional peace and security. This would be the minimum that should be done following the cowardly attacks against Kuwait and other countries in the region, and we hope that member states will support this resolution. Thank you, President.
Mr. President, this session is held in a critical junction when Bahrain is still subject for 26 successive days to unprovoked, unjustified aggression in clear violation of international humanitarian law and international human rights law that has affected the Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and the UAE. It has killed and injured numerous civilians, as well as the destruction of civilian infrastructure. Though our country is not even party to this conflict, these military aggressions on my country has disrupted vital services, and hence precautionary measures have been taken. For example, teleworking in a number of institutions, and to suspend education and to move to remote education in order to preserve the safety and security of citizens and residents. Targeting vital infrastructure is a flagrant violation of the international law, including those related to the protection of civilians and civilian objects and the enjoyment of fundamental freedoms safeguarded by the international humanitarian law, the right to life, personal safety, as stated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We categorically refuse Iran's allegations that it is using their territorial space and air for safety and security measures. The institutions, national institutions in Bahrain, carry out their duties in the protection of safety and security of Bahrainians. The Bahraini Air Force in the past few days has addressed around 153 missile and 301 drones that have targeted the kingdom, the Ministry of the Interior, the medical authorities, and all stakeholders are working round the clock to protect lives and infrastructure and to provide protection to the civilians. From an international law perspective, this is an unlawful use of force that contradicts with the UN Charter and relevant UN instruments. We have the right to preserve our unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity in accordance with the UN Charter. We praise the resolution 2817 that has categorically condemned the airstrikes launched by Iran against the GCC countries and Jordan, and called upon an immediate cessation of hostilities. We stress the importance that the Council play its role in safeguarding the enjoyment of life, freedom, and properties. The Kingdom of Bahrain believes in the importance of respecting the rules of international law and the use of peaceful means to settle conflicts, and mutual respect and good neighborliness, and to promote and protect these principles, and that the Council send a clear message calling upon the cessation of hostility and the respect of the human rights and international humanitarian law. The draft resolution put forward before the Council is an important step in this respect, and we hope that it enjoys the support by countries and be adopted by consensus. Thank you, Mr. President.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. Mr. President, the Deputy High Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, to begin, may I extend my thanks to this august assembly for holding this session. I'd also like to thank the brotherly delegation of the Kingdom of Bahrain who made this request. Ladies and gentlemen, this urgent debate is taking place given the seriousness of the Iranian aggression, including the scope of the attacks and their ongoing nature. as well as the significant consequences on human rights across our region, in particular the right to life, to a better possible state of physical and mental health, and the right to a dignified life. Jordan condemns once again, with the firmest terms, the attacks that targeted our country, as well as the member states of the GCC brotherly countries. We restate our indignation in the face of these unjustified attacks, which are a flagrant violation of international law and the sovereignty of states. We express our fully fledged solidarity with the Arab Islamic states, and we support all measures taken by these states to protect their security, stability, sovereignty, and the safety of their citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, since the 28th of February, the Jordanian armed forces, the army, have intercepted and attacked over 240 missiles and drones launched by Iran against our territory. Our armed forces, our security forces, have managed over 414 devices. The number of injured persons stands at 24 innocent civilians. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome Resolution 2817 adopted by the Security Council. This was a resolution submitted by Jordan and the member states of the GCC. This is an important measure which unanimously condemns the Iranian attacks on the sovereignty of the security and stability of the Arab states. This resolution calls for the cessation of regional tensions. And from this rostrum, we would like to restate that these attacks must stop against our countries. We restate the importance of re-establishing peace and protecting the region from the expansion of this conflict, and strengthen diplomatic efforts and dialogue to establish collective security, as well as the desired stability in the regions across the world. To conclude, I would call upon this august assembly to stand in solidarity with us and to adopt the draft resolution without a vote, and also to restate the universality of human rights in these circumstances in light of these attacks which have been carried out against sovereign states which are not a party to this armed conflict. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, President. We are watching with great concern the accelerated developments in the region, as well as the humanitarian consequences, which are significant. To attack civilians and civilian infrastructure amounts to a gross violation of the principles of international law, and this undermines the regional peace and stability. President Oman strongly condemns such practices, and we reiterate the importance of respecting sovereignty and the territorial integrity of states. We have, therefore, submitted, along with the brotherly countries of the GCC, as well as the Kingdom of Jordan, a request to hold an urgent debate in light of the unprecedented escalation. We would also like to underscore that such developments need to be addressed by tackling the root causes of the crises and the accumulation of tension, so as to prevent any further escalation, and in order to create channels for dialogue and to strengthen trust between all parties, while respecting in the most careful way international law, in particular international humanitarian law, by not targeting civilians or vital infrastructure. President, the Sultanate of Oman is known at the regional and international level for its approach that is based on moderation and wisdom. It is known for its constructive role in support of just causes, as we refuse to be hindered by geographical borders or by differences and disputes. The Sultanate of Oman would like to reiterate its full solidarity with our sister nations from the GCC and the Kingdom of Jordan and other Arab states affected by these violations. We would like to express our indignation and condemnation of the aggressive attacks these states have faced following the start of the current war in the region. We also reject the US-Israeli war against the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is an illegal war and represents a gross violation of the principles and provisions of international law. It was the spark that ignited the escalation currently affecting the region, and the consequences are threatening states and their vital economic interests and their security and stability. To conclude, the Sultanate of Oman would like to reaffirm its firm commitment to diplomacy and dialogue, which are for us a strategic choice that will make it possible to bring peace and stability. We opt for balanced approaches which address the root causes of crises in keeping with the principles of international law and international human rights law. I thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيد الرئيس، تنعقد هذه الجلسة.
In the name of God, the Great and the Merciful, this meeting is taking place at a crucial time following unprecedented attacks against the member states of the Gulf Cooperation and the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan launched by Iran, with grave repercussions that are not only affecting peace and security in the world, but also human rights. We firmly condemn the attacks by drones and missiles. Such attacks have undermined our territorial integrity, violating the UN Charter, including the principle of not using force or threatening to use it. These strikes, which have targeted civilians or civilian infrastructure, amount to a gross violation of international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Vital infrastructure such as airports and ports have been targeted, as have water desalination plants. These do not pose this poses a threat to the region's security and also violates human rights law. These attacks amount to a great source of concern for us, and we can no longer remain silent. We have been affected by ballistic missile strikes and rocket strikes. This has caused victims among civilians and undermined the water and power supply services, thereby threatening the right to safety and life. To attack the electricity and desalination plants also involves serious environmental consequences and undermines rights that are guaranteed by human rights provisions. Such measures threaten the lives of the most vulnerable, including women and children. It makes their lives more difficult and violates the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. President, the targeting of maritime ways, including the Strait of Hormuz, are a source of great concern, given the dire consequences they can have on the economy and supply routes. It also has an impact on the enjoyment of economic and social rights and the right to development in a number of states, including in developing countries. We therefore would like to recall that to protect navigation and civilian infrastructure is a moral and ethical duty that must not be undermined. Blocking the strait cannot advance the settlement of the situation anyway, and to attack a state that is not a party to the conflict and which has not allowed use of its territory in the hostilities is a violation of international law and undermines international peace and security. We have dissociated ourselves from the outset from this war, and we have refused to be part of the escalation. However, Iranians continue to target us and other neighbouring countries too, thereby undermining international peace and security. We would like to reiterate the inherent right of countries to defend themselves, the legitimate right to self-defense in keeping with the UN Charter and international law. My country would like to commend the UN Security Council resolution, which firmly condemned attacks against the Gulf states and Jordan. These attacks constitute a violation of international law and threaten international peace and security. We would like to reaffirm that the necessary reparation must be provided to the affected states and affected civilians. The state of Qatar, President, considers that human rights, peace, security and development are interdependent elements. To assault one affects the others. That is why the handling of this crisis requires a comprehensive approach in order to strengthen peaceful solutions. We call for an immediate end to the escalation, for a return to political efforts, and for dialogue to prevail so as to safeguard human dignity. We call on the Human Rights Council to shoulder its responsibilities by supporting this resolution and by closely monitoring these violations, and to take all necessary measures so as to protect human rights and avoid any repetition. Thank you.
السيد الرئيس تشكر المملكة العربية.
Thank you, President. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia would like to thank the Council for meeting our request to hold an urgent debate. We condemn the attacks by Iran against our kingdom and the member states of the Gulf Cooperation Council, as well as Jordan. These are states that are not parties to the current conflict, and these Iranian attacks amount to a gross violation of state sovereignty, of their territorial integrity. They violate the UN Charter and international law. President, we must call things by their name. To target a neighbour is a violation of the principles of good neighbourly relations. To target the mediator betrays all efforts aimed at peace and undermines any constructive initiative. To target states that are not party to the hostilities amounts to unacceptable and unjustifiable attacks that cannot be passed over in silence. Iranian attacks represent an approach that is based on the use of militia, the attack of neighbouring countries in order to undermine stability. These attacks, which seek to undermine the region's peace and stability, represent a gross violation of international law and pose a direct threat to international peace and security. Iran's attacks are aimed at claiming civilian lives, and they have targeted civilian infrastructure and energy infrastructure, which is a gross violation of international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law. We have heard attempts by Iran to evade all responsibility, and yet you cannot deny what the world clearly sees. Iran cannot escape responsibility here. To continue to follow the same approach will lead Iran nowhere. It will merely further isolate the country. My kingdom would like to recall that Iran should review its methods and end its attacks, because continuing attacks against neighbouring countries would not bring any benefits in the conflict to Iran. We condemn Iran's attacks against commercial vessels in the Gulf and the suspension of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, which is having an impact on the region and the rest of the world, and which worsens the economic situation at the international level while having an impact on most vulnerable countries, including the least developed countries and poorest countries. We would like to recall that attacks against energy infrastructure and supply chains, especially as regards food goods, also has an impact on the global situation. Finally, President, silence is not a choice. This Council must take all necessary measures so as to address these unjustified Iranian attacks while preserving protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. My kingdom calls for states to support and co-sponsor draft resolution L38. We would like to express our deepest gratitude to those states that have expressed their support for this draft resolution. We are working with the core group to engage in consultations with all states so as to agree on wording that can garner consensus and reflect the position of the international community in the face of these attacks by Iran. Thank you, President.
السيد الرئيس تواصل بلادي.
Thank you, President. The United Arab Emirates always intercept the terrorist attacks by Iran, which have been ongoing for 26 days now. We have intercepted more than 2,000 ballistic missiles and drones. These attacks were targeting airports, residential areas, civilian areas, which violates our sovereignty and international humanitarian law. This is not a mere military escalation. We are seeing random behavior that undermines international peace and security and international law, in particular when civilian infrastructure is targeted, which can undermine the safety of supply chains and energy infrastructure. Iranian strikes are not targeting the countries that attacked it in this case. Rather, Iran is striking neighboring countries that have always made effort to try and prevent such a scenario from unfolding. We have always worked on the basis of our firm conviction that military solutions always entail dire consequences. Iran stands isolated vis-à-vis its neighbours and the international community today, and Iran seeks to undermine international law by trying to spread its hegemony. Iran seeks to justify these attacks, which are unjustifiable and irresponsible. They describe these attacks as reprisals. We reject all of Iran's statements that aim to justify these attacks. We have recalled that we have never allowed the use of our airspace for attacks against Iran. What cannot be ignored is the contradiction between Iranian discourse on good neighbourly relations and Iranian practices on the ground, including Iranian attempts to justify attacks against civilians, civilian infrastructure such as airports, ports, oil facilities, and those facilities linked to tourism. This also resulted in the death of 2 members of our armed forces and 6 civilians, and 161 individuals of 29 different nationalities were injured. These repercussions and these attacks have an impact that goes beyond the region itself because they threaten navigation, including in the Strait of Hormuz, and they also have an impact on supply chains. This has, in turn, repercussions on the right to security and development. The Security Council adopted the historic Resolution 2817, which categorically condemns Iran's attacks against the United Arab Emirates and other Gulf states and against Jordan. This draft resolution was sponsored by more than 161 states and sent a clear message according to which the international community will not authorize such deliberate attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure. We therefore call on the Council to take tangible measures in order to denounce those human rights violations that stem from Iran's attacks against states who are partners when it comes to peace and security. We would like to remind all enemies of our model that our model since the very inception of our state is one that is based on good neighbourly relations, dignified life, the fight against xenophobia. We have a model that is open to the world through lasting partnerships, which has enabled our economy to be one of the most advanced economies, one that is able to adapt to change. Our model rests on foundations that cannot be destroyed, a model which allows for development and prosperity to flourish. We reserve our right to take all necessary measures in order to protect our sovereignty in keeping with Article 51 of the UN Charter. And we would like to recall that Iran's attacks have confirmed the robustness of our institutions and the unity of our society and the perseverance of our people. Thank you, President.